You are listening to the Fresh Take Network.
What it is, what it do, Joshua Adam William Arbuthnot here with Fresh Take with Sportsnet's Kyle Bukauskas.
How are you, man? I thought my name was long.
Yeah, I know. Well, I've been spreading out with the full name, and then I sting myself not getting it right. But the first time, but really nice to have you. You know, former colleagues at SAIT. I had the privilege of calling one or two basketball games with you at SAIT, but obviously now you're in the big leagues of everything. But let's kind of go all the way back. What was kind of the first time you knew that you wanted to be into broadcasting?
Well, first of all, I apologize that you were stuck with me for those few games there calling hoops, because though I thoroughly enjoyed doing it, I had no idea what I was doing in the time there. So I needed you to carry me in those moments for sure. But you know, for me, when I first think back, I tell the story a couple times here now. I mean, I always thought it was kind of late middle school, grade 10, kind of when I thought that this was something that I wanted to pursue, and I really started to think about for the first time. But it was funny, after the playoffs ended this past summer, and I went home back in BC for several months, like really from Thanksgiving weekend through just till after Christmas, just because there was nothing else going on at the time. And so over time, we ended up digging up some old home videotapes and, popped those into the VCR player and played some of it back. And we found some stuff of me doing my own little thing where,
nice.
We had the camera set up. I had a buddy over and we're sitting on the couch, and, we loved bike riding a lot as kids, and, finding different jumps and trails to ride and stuff like that. So I was interviewing him about, the art of dirt jumping and all of that. And I, of course, had no recollection of doing that. It was unbelievable to watch it back. So, though I thought all this time that it was kind of around, 14, 15 when I first got the bug to get into this business, clearly it was something that was on my mind much before then. So here we are now. Thankfully, I'm still able to do it.
Was it growing up watching Hockey Night in Canada that kind of like listening to Bob Cole and others that kind of got you into it early?
Well, that helped my love of the game of hockey for sure. I mean, that was a staple for me, and it was great, living on the West Coast. It's starting at 4:00 as opposed to 7:00 out here. So it was great. Usually as a kid, you'd have a Saturday afternoon practice at 2:00 or something, and come home right in time for the pregame show, and then into the Leaf game at 4:00 back west. So that was always a big part of our weekends. And of course, the voice of Bob Cole and Harry Neal towards the end of their run that I was fortunate to be able to grow up with the early stages of my childhood, and then Jim Houston and Craig Simpson, which I've now had the chance to work with for the last couple of years, which has been absolutely incredible for me, and just a world that I never thought I ever would have been a part of. But the Hockey Night brand, like I never even when I thought this was something I wanted to pursue, I never considered it, because I thought those are the pros over there. Like that's a completely different ball game for me. I grew up in the mornings before school, my brother and I watching either Jay and Dan on TSN or Don Taylor on Sportsnet, or the S-Pack as he called it, and just watching them do highlights and how much fun they seem to have in their craft, and just bringing the entertainment and the humor side of it, but also doing their jobs of telling the stories of the night before. I just seemed like the most fun in the entire world, and so that's really what I wanted to do when I first applied to SAIT and went through my 2 years there. That was kind of what was on the brain for myself, and then I just kind of ended up falling into the reporting and now more rinkside type hosting that I'm doing nowadays.
Yeah, so you mentioned SAIT, you went to college there. Was there any other choices? Obviously, Ryerson in Canada is a big one. Was SAIT the main choice that you wanted to go to, or was there other choices that you wanted for the broadcasting choice here in Canada?
Yeah, so SAIT was plan B for me, Josh, originally. I had applied to Ryerson.
Yeah.
I heard obviously good things about it, and that was before it was just the journalism program. It was before they had their sports media program that they have now. But that was the ace for me, that I'm going to move out to Toronto and then do a 4-year degree program there, and then we'll see what happens. And then I applied to SAIT just as a backup, because I figured that was probably a prudent thing to do. And I thought, Calgary would be great to live there. I've got family there. I was a Flames fan at the time, and not a bad option to fall back on. And so I get the letter back from Ryerson, and then they didn't accept me. I was rejected. And so I'm like, oh my God, like have I made a mistake here? Am I getting into the wrong business? You know, before it's even started, I'm questioning if this was the right decision for me to make in terms of a career path. So, and then I get the letter back from SAIT and they rejected me too. And I thought, well, geez, I've got no chance here now. What am I going to do with my life? So my dad just said, and I was, obviously really down about it. And because I had been doing, some radio stuff throughout high school, like I felt I already had like a pretty good amount of experience for someone that had never gone to post-secondary for this before. And I thought, wow, that's going to be a real feather in my cap when I start applying to schools. And I was 0 for 2. And so, it was a bummer to come to grips with. And so my dad said, you should just send SAIT, an email, thank them for the time, and just ask, what kind of, where did I miss? What went wrong with my application that ultimately made the difference for me not getting in. And because you remember, you had to send in a whole applications package, and it was different for me because I know they did the in-person interviews as part of the application process. I, of course, wasn't able to do that, so I had to mail everything into them. And so they wrote back and they said, well, we never got your application package. Like, it just got lost in the mail. So they said, we've still got spots open, like resend what you have. And then, so I'm like, oh my God. So we did that. And thankfully at that point they said, okay, we'll let you come in. And, even then, like going into the first year, I thought, I'd do 1 year and then try to transfer back to Ryerson. I was still thinking of doing that, but ended up being a total blessing in disguise because, as you can attest, it was just a wonderful 2 years there. And then, I got really, really lucky with being able to start my career at Sportsnet not long thereafter. And so at a time when if I'd gotten into Ryerson, I would have been starting year 3 of 4 there at the school. I was, moving to Toronto to begin working at that time. So it really couldn't have worked out any better. I met my girlfriend there at SAIT, and we're still together now. So I mean, there's for so many reasons, it was a total blessing that I wound up at SAIT over Ryerson.
It's so interesting to hear you didn't get in right away that first time. And because I got the rejection, I applied the same year you did the first time. I got the rejection letter that year. And I got the call the day before they had classes.
Really? I didn't know that.
To be like, hey, we have a spot. I'm like, guys, it's a day before classes. I'm just working at a local merchandiser company. I'm not going to mention the name on here right now, but they're like, yeah, we can put you in right now. I'm like, I don't know how to get a student loan or anything like that. They're like, well, then, yeah, I guess, you're one of our top choices to come back. So I have to apply afterwards. I'm like, and when you and those other talented people, I'm like, oh man, you kind of always think of like, oh, the what if in that class, because it's a super talented class, great people. So then obviously I got in the next year with everything, but it's so funny that year. It did seem, talking to some professors, that there was this adjustment period where like a few people dropped out of it at that time. So it's so interesting. It kind of shows like, where you are now in Sportsnet, kind of never give up, right? I think that's kind of the one lesson you learn of like, you're rejected from Ryerson and SAIT initially, but you still pursued this and look where you are now, right?
Yeah, I guess I just was lucky that, first off, I had the wherewithal to listen to my parents and reach back out to SAIT, of course, because, as a teenager, I struggle with that at times. And, the idea that, well, they don't know what they're talking about. And it's funny how much smarter they get the older I get, right? But no, they were great in supporting me there. And I just, it was something that I really wanted to do. I loved the idea of working in. And so part of it, you hear countless stories of kids in very similar situations where they go off to school thinking they want to do something and they get there and it's not what they thought it was going to be, and it ends up being a bit of a bummer and they end up making a change. And I was just really lucky that it was what I thought it was going to be, and I fell even more in love with it as I went through it. And certainly, hard work is involved there, and putting in the time even outside of school hours, and that leads to the stuff that we did and doing the Trojan broadcast, whether it was basketball or hockey or volleyball and all of that, and the things that were beyond school hours. And the other thing too, I was very, very fortunate growing up that, my parents, for both myself and my younger brother, they saved money as we were growing up for school. And so I wasn't, in a position where I was stuck with, student loans and debt that was waiting me on the other side. I was taken care of in that regard. So I felt lucky to have that, because I knew not everyone did. And at the same time, so I realized it was, my parents' money that was being put to work here. And I certainly wasn't going to put that to waste, right? I was going to put in the time and make sure I got something out of this. And the fact that it's kind of all that here, I couldn't have imagined it going into it, but so thankful now.
And obviously they did a great job with you. I didn't know either that they did 3 and 4 years at Ryerson. I know when I went down and did my practicum in the States, they talked about 3 or 4 years, but I didn't know Ryerson did that as well.
Yeah, it was just a degree program that I'd heard, from when I was in high school working at the local radio station. The morning show guy there, he said, Ryerson would be a good school to get into. I remember in high school again, I think I was maybe early grade 12. I got a response. I reached out to Jay Onright on Twitter, and he got back to me, and I was asking him advice, and he again said Ryerson. So I thought, well, this has to be the school for me then. So that kind of again led to the disappointment initially, but looking back, it all worked out for the best.
Well, I mean, you look at the legacy that Ryerson had, right? You mentioned like a guy like Jay Onright. There's so many. I mean, all the guys from the starters, no dunks, most of them. They went to Ryerson. I believe Tim McAuliffe went to Ryerson. And I think, but that's the thing I kind of take, being a SAIT alum, it's like, oh, we get this. We kind of have the pride of you being a SAIT alum to see on Sportsnet that kind of, lifts all. It's like, hey, man, we got our guy at SAIT.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, there's been the school's cranked out some great broadcasters and journalists, right? I mean, you look at Kelsey McEwen on your morning, Jordan Canigan doing his thing in Calgary was from my graduating class, Reed Feist, right? Pat Steinberg, and you go down the list from there, and even people that graduated from that program and maybe went on to something else that wasn't broadcasting, but were just good people. There's countless stories there as well. So I'm just try to fit in with those. It's as I said, I couldn't have been more thankful for my 2 years there.
What were some of your favorite memories at your time at SAIT?
Oh, wow. Man, there's a lot. I mean, for me, just living on my own for the first time and being on campus there and living in the residence building and, being by myself, I really enjoyed that. Like I love just being, on weekends, the first month there when I didn't really know anybody, I would just hop on the C train and just go somewhere and explore the city. So that was fun initially. And, I think of that first semester that we have of the first year. On Fridays, we had a writing class that wrapped up, I think, around 2:00 in the afternoon. And once the class kind of got to know each other pretty well, it was, straight to the gateway for pints and a late lunch on Friday. And that sort of, set the table for the weekend that lied ahead. And, that was a lot of fun. And, I got some family down there in Calgary, an aunt and uncle and their two kids, my cousins. And my one cousin, Matthew, is a couple years older than me, but, he was in his early to mid 20s when I was going to school there. So we linked up countless times on the weekends, and to be able to go out and just have a good time and meet his friends. And they were all wonderful people. But so that was part of the experience too. And then again, like my second year, it was the 2012-13 season, and that was, the lockout shortened year. So you waited for hockey to get going again. And up until that point, I had gotten a credential at the Saddle Dome to attend Calgary Hitman games. So I was going to a lot of those, and that, was really cool for me. And then once the Flames came back, being able to cover some of those games as a SAIT student. And, Jordan Canigan, who I mentioned earlier, he was working for a radio station down in Okotoks, and he was accredited to go as well. So there were some days where we'd get on the train together after school and go to the Saddle Dome to work a Flames game. And, a few times we were just sitting there looking at each other with smiles on our faces going like, who do we think we are going to do this right now? So a lot of that stuff it was a lot of just new experiences for me at a young stage of my life, 18, 19 years old, and being able to go through it with, as I said, some really good people. And it just fun, like in the newsroom, the jokes that you'd crack, and just a lot of good personalities in there. Tom Ross, I think of, Amy Leckel, John Reed, just so many, good people that, Karen Gott, like they were fun people to be around every day. And it just made the experience, along with, some really good instructors as well, just that much more enjoyable.
I got the masterclass in tying lessons from you and Tom one time, I remember.
That's when, because he had come up, he had found these really weird tie knots to wear on air, and he wrote me in, and I thought it was kind of cool for a while. And thankfully, I learned that, maybe classy is the better way to go with those, but it was fun to experiment. And that's the time to do it, right? That's where you make your mistakes and just try new things. And thankfully, the instructors and just the way things were set up there at SAIT, it allowed you to do that.
It was a perfect time for me to kind of sit under that learning tree for the tie side of things. Because in basketball, those times you had game days, you had to do your tie. And I'm like, and I always got the coach to do it. I'm like, well, if I'm going to be on air all these times, I better listen to these guys and how to do it, because that might be the right time. So you finish your time at SAIT, and then, you get the skyrocket right to Sportsnet. Talk about kind of that process to go right to there and then right to Sportsnet.
Well, so in my second year there's a woman there by the name of Lindsay English, who was running the communications department and the athletic, communications department with the athletic program. And she was, filling in on mat leave, right? She was just there for the 1 year. And so, we got to know each other a little bit because she was in charge of scheduling us to work different games, different webcasts that SAIT would put on. And so over time, we just got familiar with each other, and then she knew that I had a passion for sports and working in it. And then so early March would have been around this time. She sent me a note and asked what I was planning to do if this was my last year at SAIT and if I had anything in the works, beyond graduation. And she'd said that, when she was back in her hometown of London for reading break, she was talking to her dad, and she's like, I don't know if I mentioned this to you. My dad's the news director at Sportsnet. And I was like, I had no idea. And he goes, yeah, I mentioned you to him and he wants to see some of your work. And I just thought, wow, that would be the coolest thing in the whole world to have someone in that position, just give some feedback. Cause I've been working on a demo reel as I was, getting ready to start applying to jobs, cause I was going to be done in a couple of months anyways. And so I just thought, having some constructive criticism from someone in that position would have been, just invaluable for me at that time. So I sent the tape along, and she passed it along to her dad, Mike. And he got back to me a few days later and said some really nice things and asked what I had planned beyond this year. And at that time I had nothing. And so then the next day we were up at NAIT in Edmonton at their yearly broadcast workshop that they used to do. I'm not sure if they do it anymore, but and then we're sitting in the auditorium there, and I get an email from Scott Moore, who another Ryerson grad, but at the time I didn't know who he was, and his title was president of broadcasting at Rutgers Media, and he said I saw your demo reel, and we'd like to fly you out to Toronto for an interview and an audition with us. And so at that time, your heart stops. You're not believing what you're reading because it's not the way it's supposed to go, right? You're supposed to go to a small town and work your way up. And here this guy was telling me he wants to fly me out to Toronto of all places. So it was just completely, it takes your breath away in the moment. And then, a few months later, that was early June, I flew out there and, interviewed in the studio there. Met with a couple of different people, a couple of the execs there, and just interviewed and talked, met with Scott and talked with him in his office, and spent a day shadowing. Sean McKenzie was there in town. There's the GM meetings going on outside the NHL offices in downtown Toronto, and just kind of got to experience that for a day. And then I went home, and over the course of the summer, I just kind of waited to hear what the plan was. And so in late August, they said to me, okay, we want to move you out here to Toronto. And so about a month later, I did. And, October 1st, 2013, I started there, and fortunate to be with the company ever since. I didn't start on air right away, but it was something that they, clearly they believed in me and wanted to set me up best for success. And as I said, so lucky and grateful to be able to continue to do this stuff with them now.
What was that first day walking in and knowing that you were a Sportsnet employee like?
Oh man, surreal. And you think you're the furthest thing away from SAIT, from Campbell River, where I grew up, from BC. You're in the mecca of, Toronto Maple Leaf euphoria, the mecca of sports media, of Canada in a lot of ways, just in terms of the population, right? It's the majority of it is right in the GTA. And so when I first got there, they put me up in a hotel a couple blocks from the main Rogers campus in Toronto. So I walked over there in the morning and, trying to sort out getting, the pass card to be able to swipe into the building. And so I get one of those. And I walk into the newsroom, and it was fairly early in the morning, so not a lot of people were in it at that time yet. It was pretty quiet, and I was just kind of taking it all in. And then I see down the hall, Brad Fay comes around the corner, and I was like, oh shit, that's Brad Fay. And he comes and he looks at me, and I'm kind of looking at him sheepishly, and then he turns the corner and is walking towards me, and he's like, "You're that kid from Campbell River?" And I'm like, yeah. Like, how the hell, first, do you know who I am? And two, like, how do you know where Campbell River is and that it exists? And so anyway, so he ended up telling me that, when he first started, because he's another, West Coast guy as well. And he spent some time in CR2 working at one of the local publications early on in his career. So instantly we had that connection there. And so at a time when you feel like you're completely on the other side of the world, a little bit of home and one of your first interactions there. So that's what stuck out to me about my first day at Sportsnet.
That's and really now, so you've had like 7 years there. What's kind of been some of the highlights over there for the last, I guess it's more than 7 years, but over the last, 8 years, what's kind of been the highlights?
Yeah, there's been a lot, right? Again, just experiencing things for the first time, right? Like your first road trip, I'll never forget. And working, funny, we hit the anniversary of it a couple of days ago. A camera guy by the name of Alex Kuhn that works here at Sportsnet, and he's just a couple years older than I think he's 3 years older than me. And so in 2014, him and I were down working the trade deadline coverage for Sportsnet in Tampa, and that was the year that they traded Martin St. Louis to New York in exchange for Ryan Callahan, and that was like the big blockbuster of the day, and we were there for it. And so, I was 20 years old at the time. He was 23. So we had like an aggregate age of 43 covering the biggest hockey story of that day. Him and I were down there trying to figure out how the hell to do things. I didn't know what I was doing. And he certainly was great in helping guide me at that time. But he was still fairly new at Sportsnet too. I think it was one of his first road trips with the company as well. So it was just a total whirlwind, and it's something we laugh about, every year around this time and just reminisce about it. So stuff like that, you never forget. Being able to work my first game in Vancouver was a highlight for me, because that's where my dad took me to see my first NHL game. So my mom and dad we got them tickets, and they were in the stands to watch the game that night. And so I was doing the ringside hosting there as well. So that was a special memory. And I think back to even, in 2019, I didn't work on the broadcast for the Stanley Cup final, but, I was there just doing coverage for Sportsnet Central. And so, Game 7 Stanley Cup final in Boston, I mean, as a hockey fan, it doesn't get any better than that. So to be able to witness that and to be on the ice afterwards, interviewing the players and just seeing the emotion on their faces and having their families as a part of it. And you remember, the young girl there, Layla Anderson, that really became, the spark plug for the St. Louis Blues team and fan base for a large part of their run. She was there in Boston, came onto the ice, and being able to see Colton Parayko give her the Stanley Cup, and just the embrace between the two of them there, and just how magical all that was, that sort of stuff sticks with you forever.
How was it like, as a kid that grew up, wanted to be broadcast and as a hockey fan, and you're throwing and getting thrown to from Ron MacLean? That must have been just an absolute dream. Yeah, that was, again, just weird. Really trippy too. Yeah. So when I, first started doing Hockey Night broadcasts as a ringside host, and that started in the fall of 2016. I had moved to Montreal to begin doing the regional hosting gig for the Canadiens games. They were still part of the Sportsnet TV package then, and so then with that came some games to work on Saturday nights, and that was the first year. They had made the switch to George Stroumboulopoulos the first 2 years of the Rutgers TV deal. He was the host of Hockey Night, and then they made the switch back to Ron after that. And it was right at that same time that he was back in the chair and now working on games. And so I remember covering that fall there was the World Cup of Hockey in Toronto, and so I was embedded with Team North America. I followed them around. They had camp in Montreal, went up to Quebec City, and then to Toronto for the tournament itself. And so I remember covering their practice on an off day, and we just got an email that had our schedule for the first 3 months of the season. And I would have imagined, if you're going to get a chance to work on Hockey Night, there's a phone call, someone's going to tell you, you've been selected to be part of the Hockey Night Canada broadcast. Like, you need to understand, how big of a deal this is. Like, that's just how I figured it in my mind. But I opened the schedule and I'm looking and I see my name there. Yep, there's the regional game. Yeah, I knew you were working that one. And then the first Saturday, it's Montreal in Ottawa. There's Bob Cole's name, there's Gary Galley's name, and then there's my name. And I'm like, whoa, wait a second here. And again, it's just like, am I really believing what I'm seeing here? So that was my first taste of Hockey Night, October 15th, 2016. Bob Cole on the microphone and Gary Galley between the benches. And I will never forget sitting in the meal room there, grabbing a quick bite before the game, nervous as all hell, trying to just stomach something before the game started. And Bob came walking in and he approaches me and goes, "You mind if I sit down here?" And like,
what am I going to say? No. Yes, please, Bob, have a sit. And so he sat down and he brought out the rosters of the two teams playing that night. And so he went through all the names with me to make sure I had the pronunciations right. And so I appreciated that from him, to make sure that, I felt that I knew the names right. Obviously, you're around hockey long enough, you get a feel for which names or how to pronounce them properly. But just for him to go through that with me meant a lot. So to go back to being thrown to by Ron McLean, I later that year I worked the playoff series in the first round between Montreal and New York. And so, pandemonium in the Bell Center, the playoff atmosphere, all of that you hear about, feeling the energy there, standing in the 100 level of the Bell Center. And just before the game, the players are coming on the ice, the crowd is up, and the energy is unlike anything else that you can imagine during playoff hockey. It's the best. And so I'm listening to Ron here and in my IFB, and so he's going, Montreal, New York, game 1 from the Bell Center. The next voice you will hear is Kyle Bukauskas. Enjoy. And I'm like, oh crap, like that's me. And so it was just stuff like that how the hell did I get here? Those type of feelings that you have every now and then. And certainly that was one of it for me.
And you mentioned, so on top of that, you mentioned, going around following Team North America. How has it been, the first time you went into an NHL locker room? What was that? And in that time, have you started developing any certain relationships with any certain players?
Yeah, I think for the first part, you're trying to get your bearings. And certainly when I first moved to Toronto, and now you're covering Leaf practices and going to Leaf games, and just the horde of media that would be there on a day-to-day basis isn't quite the same now, obviously, as the media landscape has changed over the years. But, certainly early on, I was deathly afraid to, God forbid, ask a question in a scrum, because you're like, God, what if you say the wrong thing? What if it sounds stupid? What are they all going to think of you? What's the player going to do? How are they going to react? So there was a little bit of fear there going in. So it took you a while to kind of get used to how things work there and how to best approach certain questions and just the whole idea of working a scrum, right? So that obviously comes with time. And in terms of relationships, it comes in. It's obviously difficult now, right? Everything done over Zoom, but it just comes with time, right? When a player gets used to seeing you every day, and they know how you go about approaching things, and you're not a stranger to them anymore. They've seen you around. It just kind of grows, and there's that trust that eventually, hopefully, develops. I mean, there's some players obviously that are better to deal with than others, and that are a little more forgiving of their time, and that's totally fine. They all have their own rights to handle those interactions, and that's no problem, and I respect that. But I think it just comes with time, right? And I try to be careful. I'm not one to try to be buddy with a player. You have to understand kind of the line between you're doing a job and they have a job to do. But certainly when you can get to that point with certain guys that maybe you can ask certain questions that they're understanding of, and that you're going to get an honest answer from them, then that's kind of really what you want, and that's what I think you look for as you deal with players on a day-to-day basis. Who can you go to that you're going to get something honest from, or at least close to?
Is there a particular interview that stands out that you really enjoyed, or that stands out with the career so far? Yeah,
there's been a couple ones. I mean, one that comes to mind for me, I was living in Montreal still at the time, and we'd set up a sit-down interview with Tyler Seguin just on an off day. So they had played in, I think, New Jersey the night before, so they fly into Montreal, and the interview was quite early in the morning the next day. I think it was around 8:30 at their hotel. So we had a crew come in and set up the room, how they wanted it to look for the shoot. And I came in around 8 a.m. just to make sure everything was all good. And so we're sitting there waiting, and then PR comes in, and how are things going, guys? All right, you ready for Tyler? Okay, I'll let him know that you're ready. So he comes walking in, and it looks like he had got maybe an hour's sleep. I'm sure he got probably a little more than that, but I mean, he did not look full of energy. I'll tell you that. I mean, he still had like the pea coat jacket on, as if we were doing this thing outside. He had the toque on too, which I know is just kind of the typical hockey look when you're on the road, certainly in the wintertime. And he came and sat down. I was just kind of, grumbling a little bit, not, disrespectful anyway, but you could tell. I mean, the guy just played a game the night before. And so I'm asking him, like, what time did you get in last night? He goes, oh, we probably got in around, 1:30 by the time we got off the plane and on the bus and all that. And I'm like, I'm sure you're wired a bit for a bit yet. Like, you're not going to sleep right away. And he's like, yeah. So I'm going, man, like I don't know if this interview is going to go very well here. Like the cards are stacked against us. And so anyway, so crew says cameras are ready. So I looked at him. I said, you good, Tyler? And he's like gave me one of those, and I'm like, oh God, here we go. And then we started the interview, and he was fantastic. He was so engaging. It was a real pleasure to talk to. It was, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes we ended up speaking for, and just a great interview subject to speak with for a little bit. And then it ended, and he was like, all right, okay, thanks. And then he was gone. But and that one always stuck with me because I thought it was going to go horribly, and it ended up being one that I really enjoyed.
Fantastic. Switching gears to kind of this past year, kind of talk about the day, everything. We're almost on the anniversary of the pandemic day, the Rudy Gobert day. Kind of talk about that day when everything starts getting suspended and up until the bubble. And we'll talk about the bubble side in a bit, but just kind of those months and leading to suspensions and everything that was going on in that time for you.
So the week before, I was down in Boca Raton, Florida, covering the NHL GM meetings. And it was great. It was like the last bit of normalcy that I remember before all of this changed. It was really the last place that I was. So we were down there. The weather was great. It was nice and warm. And the COVID topic was discussed even, in the interviews with the GMs. The commissioner spoke about it too, but it wasn't like, it was about, we've got contingency plans in place if, something terrible ever happened, but really, we're not worried about it right now. There were certain countries over in Europe at that time that were in like the red zone. And so they'd said, our European scouts that are in those red zones, if they were to come back to the US now or any NHL league staff, they would have to quarantine for 2 weeks. And it was like, oh, okay, wow. Yeah, that's quite serious for them over there. But still at that time, you're going, not really worried about things where we are yet. And I had that Saturday, I had a game in Sunrise. The Canadians were playing there against the Panthers. And that morning, the league came out with new protocols that all interviews with players and coaches were going to be done in the hallways. Like medias would not be permitted into the dressing rooms. So you'd still do the same scrums, but now it's just in the hallways now. So that was like the kind of first, okay, I get it. Like they're just kind of being extra precautious here. Hopefully this doesn't last too long. But it's understandable. And this is also the height of spring break too. Yeah. So, I mean, we went down to like the Friday night, went and had dinner down in Fort Lauderdale, and the place is just jammed with spring breakers, right? Like crowds upon crowds upon crowds. And I believe the number was 13 at that time. There were 13 confirmed cases in the state of Florida of COVID-19. And it was all still so new to us. And I was so naive to what it was and just how severe it was. Like I remember at one time walking along the sidewalk, and there was like a little like murky puddle in one of the cracks along the road there. And I kind of looked down and I was like, well, I wonder if COVID's in there. Like I didn't know any better.
Yeah,
right?
None of us did. Yeah.
So anyway, so that weekend happened. Yeah. So that weekend happens, and the Sunday night I was supposed to fly home. It ended up getting delayed. I didn't fly till like 8 p.m. that day. So again, we went back down to this beach because we had nothing else to do. Just sat, hung around, went for lunch, and just made the time go by and not thinking about anything. And so come home that day, and Monday, my girlfriend and I hung out, and we went skating here on the canal for the last time before it closed for the year. Tuesday goes by, and then the Wednesday night was when the Gobert stuff happened. And so I remember earlier that day, they announced that the final 3 hometown hockey stops were canceled for the year. They weren't going on the road because of the increasing concern with all of this. And so one of the 3 stops was Campbell River. And I was booked to go back there to be part of the show on the Sunday. So when I saw that, like that was like the bummer moment for me. That's where I was like a little bit mad. Like, you guys got to be kidding me. Like, we're so close for something like that. I was really excited to go. And I'm like, this stupid virus went and did that. And so I see that. So I was, a little bummed about that. And that night, my girlfriend was playing in her just her local community like rec volleyball league with some friends of ours. So I went to go watch. And so as in between sets, I'm scrolling Twitter on my phone, and then I see the stuff about Gobert test positive, and then a few minutes later, bang, the NBA season is suspended. And we were supposed to do a game in Boston that weekend, and I saw that and I went, well, we're not going to Boston this weekend. No chance. Like, everything's coming to a halt now for a bit. And then it was just like everybody else, surreal, the Thursday of the amount of sporting events that were postponed or canceled. And it just, the NHL eventually suspended their season or paused as the commissioner put it. And then, it was just like the emails, because we had all our travel booked from that point to the end of the regular season, which was about a month at that time. And so we, email after email, this flight's been canceled, this flight's been canceled, this hotel's been canceled. And it's all like, there we go. It's all coming to a stop here now. Like in snap of your fingers. So then, like everybody else, to just sit and isolate, and now we're just learning more. And over time, they started to do a few things work-wise, just through now this Zoom thing came into our lives that we're learning how to use, and doing some interviews over that. And then, over time, there was, after a few months, the thought of return to play and some playoffs. And then that ultimately set the stage for a summer full of hockey that we've never seen before.
How was the bubble experience for you? Because obviously you weren't in the bubble, so you did, much like you kind of saw from a lot of broadcasters, you did stuff from away from the bubble. So what was that like?
Yeah, it was, fine for what it was. Like, I was in Toronto for a month, basically all of August. I was there doing the qualification round and then the first 2 rounds. And it was, good in that there was some stuff you could do in the city. Like, it had, the restrictions had loosened to a point where, you could go safely dinner a couple nights with some of the guys that you hadn't seen in a while. And obviously just had to be careful in limiting the amount of times that you did that. But, I drove down, so I brought my bike with me, my road bike. So, one of the producers that I work with, him and her partner, or his partner, they're big into cycling. So, I went for some rides with them on off days, and the hockey itself was weird, obviously, because you're in a building, there's no fans. And so once you kind of got over that, it was okay. And just the new protocols of everything that were so different from what we had been used to doing. But the stuff from temperature checks to being asked questions of if you've been outside the country anytime in the past 14 days, we'd already kind of gotten used to that, just as things are starting to open up around, wherever you lived at the time, and the different protocols that had already been put in place. That wasn't too much of an adjustment, but it was unique in every sense of the word in terms of the experience of working. But then, excuse me, and then going from there to Edmonton for the final 2 rounds and to see the cup hoisted. It was neat. Like, I was so fortunate to be asked to do that and to be able to say that I was there. But I just hope that, we never have to go through anything like that again.
So outside of hockey, just a few questions on this side. You've been lucky enough to be in Toronto during the Raptors run. And obviously, hockey's the main side you cover, but what was it like to be, part of Sportsnet in the city, or around at least the province at that time, as the Raptors run was going on?
Well, when they won in 2019, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's funny, like, because we were doing playoffs at the same time, right? And
I guess so, yeah.
So like the first round, it was Toronto, Boston, and excuse me. So the Raptors played Orlando that round. So we
I
were
was there.
Yeah, there you go. So we got a bit of taste of just the flavor for Toronto there for those couple of trips that we were back in the city, and then the Leafs got knocked out. And so for the next month, I was basically in the US exclusively. So it was interesting to kind of get the US telecast perspective, right? To see it on TNT. And I remember it was the Mother's Day Sunday, we had an afternoon game, game 2 of Columbus, Boston. And Boston, Carolina. It was the 3rd round Eastern Conference Final. So, and then my producer and I were flying to Raleigh that night just to get it over with, because we had the time to do it. And so that was the same day of Game 7, Toronto, Philly. And so we're sitting in the bar there at the hotel airport in Boston, and watching the final minutes tick away. And it was one of those things where, like, Jesus, we're gonna have to get on the flight soon. We're going to miss how this game ends. And then we get the notification that our flight's been delayed 20 minutes. And we're like, oh, thank God. And so that's where we were when we watched Kawhi hit the shot. And it was great because there was like 5 of us, I think, watching the TVs. And so the small group of us all went crazy. And everyone else around the airport, was wondering what the fuss was about. The bartenders yelling, free Molson for everyone. So that was a good memory. And then just, again, I remember like flying into Boston ahead of the Stanley Cup final the night that they knocked off Milwaukee. And so I missed most of the game, almost all of it, just because I was traveling during the game. And I remember, Craig Simpson was already in his hotel room watching the game. So like I got to the hotel and like didn't even go to my room. I was like, what room are you in? So I just sprinted up to his room with my suitcase, and we sat and watched the last couple of minutes to see them knock it off. And then so that was my experience. I was seeing it from that perspective. I wasn't in the city when things really got tense and got exciting, but it was just cool to see it, to be down in the States and to flip on ABC and there you see the Canada's team being talked about there in such a positive way as a team that eventually became champions. It was a really cool thing.
So what's the future for Kyle Bukauskas?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I think
Olympics.
We've got taco salad for dinner tonight. I know that,
okay.
And beyond that, I'm not sure. Yeah, I would love to, Josh. And I go back to that meeting that I had with Scott Moore when I first met with him in Toronto, and he asked me, what do you want to do? And I said, I'd love to work a Stanley Cup final, and I'd love to cover an Olympics. And I've been fortunate to do a couple of Stanley Cup finals, and so the Olympics would be next on the bucket list for sure. I don't know if it's going to happen anytime soon, but I would love to. If I ever got the opportunity, I certainly wouldn't turn it down.
So that's everything for the broadcast side. I had a few side NHL questions that some fans asked us about, so I wanted to kind of hit you in some of those. Obviously, you know where I'm from, so you know where the first question what it's going to be. So obviously, the Flames just got a new coach, bringing Sutter back, and the unfinished business thing is all over the city the last few days. Kind of just your thoughts about the struggles the Flames have had and what Sutter you think can do for the Flames here, coming down to the stretch here for the final half of the season.
Yeah, it's been puzzling to watch them, right? Because you look at them on paper and you think, man, this should be a good team, right? Like, you love the additions they made in the offseason from Markstrom to Tanev, right? And you felt like it was a really good mix there. Obviously, they had offensive fire. I love Matthew Tkachuk. I mean, Brady Tkachuk is a great player here in Ottawa, and the two of them are doing wonderful things in the NHL. But so their play was just so puzzling for me, and obviously a lot of people, because just before they made the coaching change, they were here in Ottawa for 3 games, and watching them in person going, like, you just barely recognize them from what they should be. And I thought it was really telling when Milan Lucic went on 960 after they got pumped by the Senators there a few days before they ended up making the change, and said, we just want it to be too easy right now. We're not willing to put it in the work. Well, Daryl Sutter's a guy that's not going to allow it to be too easy, right? So I guess there was, clearly there's been some coaches that have come through that, it seemed like, some of the core players there, or whether it's the core players or whoever it was, but obviously there was some guys that, were really good guys as coaches, but maybe didn't have that hard, gruff exterior, and maybe that was taken advantage of a few times too many, and that led to the style that maybe wasn't hard enough to play against over the course of the last few years here. But certainly bringing in a guy like Daryl Sutter, he's not someone you bring in that's going to coach the team for the next 10 years, but a good spot duty, if you will, for the next couple, where you've got a core here that really needs to win now or win soon. Otherwise, you got to blow the thing up and kind of start fresh. And obviously, this isn't the time to be doing something like that. So you got to get a coach that's going to hopefully get the best out of them. And clearly, there's a reason why they believe Daryl Sutter's the best guy to do that.
Well, if they have this unfinished business, you look at this roster, it's obviously more talented than 04. There's no question about that. And like you said, with the additions they had, I think when everyone looked at the Canadian division, they had the Flames near one of the top teams because of how talented the squad is. And then they finally got the goalie that was supposed to be the missing piece. Right.
And because that had been the issue in years past, right? Like they'd shot the lights out. They had some solid defenders, and the issue was goaltending, right? Like they haven't had an established number one since Kiprasov, right? It's been the carousel. They thought they had someone in Mike Smith that just didn't quite work out. And then David Riddick got a little bit wobbly there towards the end too. And now, he's a little better slotted as a good option too for the Calgary Flames in net. So I just think, for someone like Sam Bennett, and you go back to early on in the year where it became public that, he wanted a trade out of Calgary, nothing happened there. I just think he could be a guy that could really flourish under someone like Daryl Sutter, a fresh start for him and for, a lot of players there that, I think are capable of playing a much tougher game, and he's the coach to bring that out of them.
Mentioned Bennett with the trade. Do you think, so really the only big trade we've seen is the Dubois trade. Do you think there's been less trades because of the quarantine period? And when we get to this trade deadline, there's going to be a lot less just because of that very reason?
For sure it will be, and it's just tough to move money right now, right? With the flat cap, and there's owners that go, I don't want to be taking on any more money right now, and just in terms of making it all fit within a team structure, it's a lot more difficult right now than it was a year ago at this time before everything changed. So that's part of it, and yes, so too the quarantine, because if you wait to the deadline to make a move, if you're a Canadian team and you're trading for someone in the U.S., then you're waiting an additional 2 weeks before you can actually get the player into your lineup. And so that takes you to what, 2.5 weeks, maybe 2 weeks of regular season playing time, and then you're into the playoffs. And they talk about enough, in normal times about the challenges of getting somebody at the trade deadline, when there isn't quarantine involved, and getting them acclimated in time so they're actually, impactful for your team when the playoffs do roll around. Now it's even less time you've got to get acclimated. So I think, if there's teams that identify themselves, certainly Toronto would be one, and I'm curious, which other teams in this division would see themselves as a team that could potentially win now. I think obviously Montreal still believes that, even though they've hit a rough patch, but those that identify as buyers and trying to strike quickly, because they're going, if there's someone out there that we believe is going to help our team, we've got to make something happen now so that you can deal with the quarantine, get all of that over with, and get them into the lineup and integrated into the culture of a team, to give them as much time to gel for when the playoffs roll around.
Mentioned Montreal on a bit of a rough patch. Obviously, they started off great, undefeated. Is it problems within the locker room? Obviously, they fired their coaching staff and brought a new coach. They fired their goaltender coach within the first period or something. Is it stuff internally in the locker room, or is it just hitting a rough patch in the season?
Yeah, I don't think it's a locker room issue per se, right? Like, you look at the players there, from Shea Weber to Ben Sherratt to Brendan Gallagher, Carey Price, and you go down the list. Like, those guys, if there's a problem in that room, like, it's getting sorted out and straightened out real quick, right? So I don't believe it's that there. I think it was just time for a new message, right? Like, they got going really white hot to start, and then the first sign of adversity, things just didn't start, or it just stopped working, right? They weren't clicking like they were initially. And so when you see a team not responding the way that the coach would like them to, then as a GM, Mark Bergevin's position, he's going, I've made all these moves in the offseason, I've spent all this cap space, I'm part of the one team that actually spent. I had an owner that agreed to spending an incredible amount of money to bolster our team here. Missing the playoffs is not an option for the organization or for him. So he knew he had to make a move, and then ditto with Stefan Waite, because he saw, again, just some trends with Carey Price that he felt that a fresh voice and a new voice would ultimately be beneficial to his number one goaltender. I think underlines the pressure that he is under, and just the expectations of this team that, maybe being in a fight, if things kind of bounce their way and getting in the playoffs down the stretch, like that's not an option. This is a team that came out and said it. It wasn't the media that hyped them up. They themselves came out and said they believe they're a playoff team and can hang with anyone in the league here with the way they're constructed. So when he saw signs of the contrary happening, then you knew he needed to make some moves. And I think that's why you saw a handful of changes made to their coaching staff in the span of a week.
So you're in Ottawa, and this young team, I really, really admired the way they played. A lot of young talent there. How has it been kind of watching this team up close? Obviously they're not a favorite to win the division or anything like that, but it seems specifically the last few weeks, like, just played really, really tough.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of was going to be their MO going in, right? And I think maybe we underestimated the fact that they bring in so many new faces that, hadn't been part of things here in Ottawa. And then at the same time, you had some young guys that were coming up and trying to establish themselves as NHL players, even though if they had been with the organization for a while. If you're Drake Batherson or Josh Norris, you're still trying to find your way now in the NHL as a full-time guy for the first time. And you've got Tim Stützle coming in as an 18, now turning 19-year-old. He's trying to carve out his way in the NHL, and you put everything together. It's no wonder why they struggled so mightily out of the gate, because they just didn't have the extended time that you'd normally get in a preseason, and a little bit longer training camp to try to get used to one another. But once they did, some success followed, and they've been giving some teams some fits. So when I watch them, I think what you look for is just to see the young players, and you look for the improvements that they make. And there's been a lot from Stützle, seemingly adjusting to whatever, opposing teams are throwing at them. It's clear that he's not going to have an issue turning himself into a dynamic player at this level, as he's been at every other stage of his life. Drake Batherson goes on a 6-game goal scoring streak, and Brady Tkachuk continues to be just a bull in front of the net that actually has some good finish on him too. And you just kind of go down the list. Like, there's a lot of young players that give you reason to be excited if you're a Senators fan. And the question is, and I think, the big pressure now going forward is, you've got these young guys, and how do you best insulate them, and how do you best find the complementary pieces, right? Like, Pierre Dorion went out and did a lot in the offseason. He brought in a lot of guys, but you look at already, Cedric Paquette is no longer here. Alex Galchenyuk is no longer here, unfortunately, and it's nobody's fault that Derek Stepan gets hurt, because he was actually starting to show some promise as a good depth option at center, and then he gets the shoulder injury, now needs surgery. He's done for the year. So you got to make sure that if you're in charge of things here, that you're finding the right pieces to complement a good core group of young players, so that when they start to mature and you get into a stage where this team should be capable of winning. I mean, I go back to when the owner came out and said, and the 5-year run of unparalleled success that's supposed to start in the fall of 2021. I know things maybe changed a little bit now, because of course you're not anticipating a pandemic coming, but this was supposed to be where the start of the 5-year run began. So for a team that's they cleared everyone out, they went down to the bottom of the standings, they've got their high draft picks, and certainly getting the San Jose pick and the Carlson deal that wound up becoming Tim Stützle. They couldn't have imagined that was going to be the case when they first made the deal. So that's an added bonus there. And so how do you best complement them to make them a team that's conceivably a season from now that's at least in the mix for a playoff spot? That'll be the biggest challenge.
And then finally, so the Leafs right now are on the top of the Canadian division, at least. Do you think right now, the way they've been playing, that they're the Cup favorites, or is it somebody else that you're looking at, like a Tampa or someone else?
It's tough just because they're not playing each other, right? Like, that's until they actually go up against one another, it's really difficult. But there's no question. I know they had a bit of a setback losing 2 straight to Vancouver here at the end of last week, but they've identified themselves as the clash of the division. The thing I look at, for them, if you're wondering if they've really made strides as a team, they don't have problems scoring. That's not been an issue really since Matthews and Marner and Nylander have come into the league, right? Like, they've found ways to score it, whether it's 5-on-5, and their power play looks so lethal a lot of the times here again this year. But how are they defensively? And you look at the different numbers, you can look at some of the more basic ones in terms of goals against and versus the rest of the league, and then some of the stuff in terms of the scoring chances they gave up, and the shot attempts, and if you go even a little bit further, the chances that they give up off the rush, or the passes they allowed into the slot for high danger shots against. Those were the numbers that last year looked awful for them, and this year it's a much different story. They're in much better position. So if that continues, clearly they're a team that's learned to play a bit better defensively. It was the biggest focus for Sheldon Keefe entering training camp here this year. They feel they've made their back end better, and it certainly looks that way with TJ Brody in the mix here now. And even a guy like Zach Bogosian, just as not going to play a ton of minutes for you, but just a good, reliable third pair guy that can help patch things up along the way at certain points in a game and kill penalties for you. That goes a long way. So there's certainly signs that suggest this is a different Toronto team that we've seen in years past. But like a team like them that hasn't had the playoff success until the postseason begins, that's when it's really going to matter, right? Like, they could run the table and not lose a game from now until the beginning of May, but until they start winning some playoff rounds, there's always going to be that little bit of skepticism.
Absolutely. Well, Kyle, it was an absolute privilege to have you on here. It's been a privilege to be able to share a desk with you. And again, just thanks for being able to come on the podcast.
Yeah, it was good catching up, Josh. Thanks for having me, man.
Absolutely. Until next time, folks, cheers and enjoy the day.